The hall of the Galactic Council was abuzz, its polished chrome surfaces shimmering under the soft glow of the bioluminescent algae. A cacophony of hushed chirps, whistles, and telepathic murmurs filled the chamber. The source of the excitement? A delegation was about to arrive that, quite frankly, nobody knew what to do with. Humans. A century ago, these backwater primitives had stumbled onto FTL travel, their rattletrap ship looking more like a flying grain silo than a starship. It had barely limped to the nearest comm beacon. It was less of an introduction and more of a cosmic car crash. And they all smelled like cows. Ambassador Zatrilli had warbled with disgust during the initial briefing. Apparently humans raised these bovine creatures for both companionship and sustenance, a culinary practice that sent ripples of horror through the plant-based delegates. Still, protocol was protocol. The humans had been extended a cordial welcome, toured the hallowed halls, and politely ushered back to their odd little planet. There'd been talk of sending experts to help with their quaint notions of technology, perhaps ease them into the 28th century. But then bureaucracy snarled everything up. Budgets were debated, and the humans, they were promptly forgotten. Until now. The delegation was due any moment. The council had sent a formal invitation expecting an update full of charming backwardness and requests for aid. They were in for one galaxy-sized surprise. The Grand Monitor, a towering crustacean like being cleared its throat with a rasp that sounded suspiciously like a lobster bubbling in a pot.
The delegation from Earth has entered orbit,
he announced, his eyes scanning a holographic display.
They request permission to dock.
Buzzing and twittering erupted anew as nervous antennae twitched. This didn't line up with any of the projections. A century wasn't even a blink in technological development for most council races. Were the humans here to trade? What is it? Livestock, strange fermented beverages? Faded denim garments covered in embroidered flowers?
Permission granted,
squawked a feathered representative from a gas giant.
But screen their weaponry. Those primates are unpredictable.
Zatrilli felt a twinge of sympathy for the humans. They must be mortified. It was clear their first impression hadn't exactly inspired awe, but this was the Galactic Council. Progress was measured in millennia, not decades. The massive door of the chamber hissed open. The first thing, though, wasn't a human, but a creature straight out of every sentient species' nightmare. It was the size of a small shuttle, covered in a spiked gray hide and dripping enough drool to short-circuit a small robot. 4 blood-red eyes glared at the assembled council, but its spiked tail was wagging? "Oh, come on now, Sugar Lump, behave yourself," drawled a human voice. A man in a battered Stetson strolled through the doorway, oblivious to the pandemonium he caused. He was followed by a small group of his fellows, all clad in clothing that could be best described as space cowboy. Zatrilli's antennae drooped. The worst-case scenario was unfolding. The humans hadn't just regressed, they'd gone full feral.
"You don't mind if we park this old gal somewhere?"
the leader asked with exaggerated politeness, gesturing towards the creature apparently named Sugar Lump. It had started sniffing insistently at a potted fern, looking rather interested in making it lunch. For a moment there was stunned silence. Then, as if a dam had broken, every translator chip in the room started blasting at once, trying to decipher the human's oddly accented dialect. The crustacean Grand Monitor flailed several of his segmented arms in distress.
"Order! Order!"
he screeched above the din.
"Ambassador Johnson, is it?"
He consulted a datapad, then winced at the name Sugar Lump displayed beside the creature's rather menacing portrait.
"What is that?"
Ambassador Johnson grinned, showing a disturbing array of white teeth.
Grand Monitor, you gotta meet Sugar here. She's about the sweetest critter this side of the old Milky Way. Ain't that right, girl?"
Sugar Lump let out an ear-splitting bark that sounded suspiciously like a roar. It promptly sat down, nearly crushing the fern, and stared expectantly at Johnson.
"Yes, sir, yes, sir."
Johnson patted the side of the creature the size of a tank.
"Now, if we can settle her down, maybe figure out a safe spot for a spaceship or two, we got some talking to do."
The council devolved into a symphony of squeaks, trills, and frantic holographic projections. Zatrilli's translator buzzed erratically as it tried to make sense of it all. Had the humans domesticated these groks, they called them? It was considered biologically impossible, a fool's errand. The groks were notoriously solitary, aggressive, and devoured anything that even remotely resembled food. yet this one was wagging its tail and drooling over potted plants. He leaned over and nudged a scaled reptilian diplomat, whispering, "Perhaps they altered the Groks genetically? Or perhaps they're more advanced than we suspected. Perhaps we should be a bit more accommodating." The reptilian diplomat, his scales shifting from an alarmed green to a more thoughtful yellow, nodded slowly.
"A valid point," he hissed back. "This could be disruptive."
Meanwhile, Ambassador Johnson had produced a battered leathered pouch. With exaggerated care, he removed a stick from it and held it outwards toward Sugarlump.
"Treat? Who's a good girl?"
he crooned. The behemoth launched itself forward, and the council members collectively flinched as the treat vanished into its maw with an audible crunch. Sugarlump let out a grunt of satisfaction, her tail thumping against the floor like a seismic tremor. A ripple of fascinated murmurs coursed through the translators. Several delegates leaned forward, squinting at the strange offering.
"Well, that appears to be dehydrated animal flesh coated in spices,"
chirped a bird-like representative, cocking her head to the side.
"Fascinating."
"Now, about those ships," Johnson continued, wiping his hands on his equally battered pants.
"They're kind of big. Y'all got some extra docking space somewhere?"
The Grand Monitor, his lobster-like mandible still working as if chewing on a particularly tough bit of information, blinked several times.
Of course," he managed to sputter. We weren't expecting, well, ships of their size."
As instructions were hastily relayed for their unexpected guests, Ambassador Johnson surveyed the room with a twinkle in his eyes.
"Well, fellas," he said to his companions, "seems like them technical courses we took paid off. 100 years sure goes by fast, though, don't it?"
He winked at Zatrilli, who suddenly had a very bad feeling that the Galactic Council was in for the ride of their lives. Humans weren't just backwater hicks anymore, and it seemed everyone was about to learn the hard way. News of the humans' arrival and their, well, unorthodox pets spread through the council complex with astonishing speed. Soon delegates not involved in the main reception were discreetly, and not so discreetly, finding excuses to pass by. Ambassador Johnson and his crew were enjoying their newfound celebrity status. Sugarlump, along with two other similarly intimidating specimens named Moonshine and Daisy, were settled with their own dedicated security detail in a hastily converted storage unit. The humans apparently referred to them as moondogs, insisting they were as gentle as, well, puppies, just a tad bit bigger. "So," Ambassador Johnson drawled, leaning back and propping his boots up on a rather delicate and ancient piece of statuary,
"I reckon we got some catching up to do. How about you folks give us a rundown on what we missed?"
The council members exchanged nervous glances. Catching up a century of galactic politics, trade routes, and technological advancements would take weeks. But there was one thing burning in everyone's mind.
"Ambassador,"
the Grand Monitor ventured cautiously,
"your ships, they appear vastly different from your initial vessel."
Johnson chuckled, the sound surprisingly rich in the sterile chamber.
"Well, shucks, we kind of got tired of being the laughingstock of the galaxy," he admitted. "Old Bessie there," he nodded fondly at a holographic projection of the original jalopy of a ship. "Well, she served us well, but a fellow can only take so much duct tape and hope."
Zatrilli leaned forward. "But to develop such advanced technology in a mere century, it's unprecedented."
"Unprecedented, huh?"
Johnson stroked his chin thoughtfully.
"Well, you see, back on Earth, we got something called competition. Drives us to be better, faster, stronger, even if it means building a better barbecue for Saturday night. Woo!"
A ripple of confusion flowed through the chamber. Barbecue? Several translators chirped in unison. Zatrilli had a vague recollection of that term from the first briefing. Meat, smoke, something about rituals.
"Well, it's kind of hard to explain," Johnson grinned, "but suffice it to say, we got a knack for taking something simple and figuring out how to make it awesome." He leaned forward, a glint in his eye. "And it turns out that applies to more than just cooking ribs."
The Grand Monitor, feeling a headache coming on, decided to steer the conversation back to more concrete matters.
"However you achieve this, your advancements are remarkable. We prepared to offer assistance, technological exchanges, anything to help you integrate further into the council."
Johnson's grin widened.
"Well, now, that's mighty kind of y'all. But," he held up a finger, we might not be the ones needing assistance anymore.
Whispers and concerned chirps filled the room. What exactly did the human mean?
See, fellas, Johnson drawled, while y'all were busy debating budgets and whatnot, Earth got a bit crowded. Turns out space ain't as empty as we thought, and some of our new neighbors were not so friendly. But humans, well, we're protective of our kin. Kinda like how Sugar Lump here ain't so fond of folks messing with her favorite fern.
Sugar Lump, currently gnawing on a particularly fascinating piece of support beam, let out a low growl in agreement.
So, we got to work, we figured out how to make new ships, new weapons, even figured out how to talk a little sense into these groks fellas.
He gestured towards the ceiling where presumably his moondogs were being entertained.
And, well, let's just say the neighborhood's a whole lot safer these days.
A hush fell over the chamber as the weight of Johnson's words sank in. They had all dismissed the humans as simpletons, yet here they were, hinting at interstellar conflict and technological breakthroughs the Council only dreamed of. Citrilli felt his antennae twitch nervously. But Grok's taming? That's considered biologically impossible.
Possible is a mighty big word, Johnson drawled. All I know is sugar plum and a whole lot of patience seem to work just fine. Daisy there loves just having her little belly scratched, don't you, girl?
A muffled bark and the sound of something large and heavy shifting echoed down from above, making several delegates jump.
Now, we may not be fancy like some of you, Johnson continued, but we get things done. Maybe Earth with its barbecues and old pickup trucks ain't much to look at, but she's taught us a thing or two about grit, cleverness, and protecting what's ours.
The feathered representative from the gas giant puffed up her plumage.
And these conflicts you mentioned, is it in the Council's mandate to protect member worlds from external threats?
We appreciate that, ma'am, Johnson tipped his hat, but we handled ourselves just fine. Besides, we ain't here to cause trouble. We're looking for partners, trade routes, knowledge sharing. It turns out hauling cattle and blasting space pirates ain't so different when you think about it.
He stood up and stretched.
So, fellas, what's it gonna be? Y'all still think we're just those hicks that showed up in their jalopy, or are we gonna start talking about the future?
The Grand Monitor's mandibles clacked nervously. Suddenly the human's disarmingly casual attire and slow drawl seemed less like ignorance and more calculated. This was negotiation, plain and simple, though spun with a folksy style that no one in the chamber had ever encountered. He looked around at his fellow council members. The initial panic had given way to a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a healthy dose of self-preservation. To deny the humans' potential was foolish, even if their methods were unorthodox.
Ambassador Johnson,
the Grand Monitor began cautiously.
It seems a reassessment is needed. Perhaps we might schedule more in-depth discussions. Your advancements and experiences would be valuable assets to the Council.
Johnson's grin widened, and he gave a slight bow.
Now, that sounds mighty neighborly of you. You see, Earth folks, we value partnership over protocol. We might not be the smoothest talkers, but we'll have your back when it counts.
He glanced towards the ceiling and a thoughtful gleam in his eyes.
And I reckon these Groks fellas will too, just so long as y'all keeping them ferns well stocked.
He winked. A series of agreements and conciliatory trills filled the chamber. It seemed the Galactic Council's perception of its newest members was undergoing a major overhaul. The humans hadn't changed, but the lens through which they were viewed had shifted drastically. They were still a little rough around the edges, still smelled faintly of livestock, but their rapid rise and unexpected power couldn't be ignored. Ambassador Citrilli felt a grudging admiration. Perhaps these humans were like those strange barbecued meats they were so fond of, seemingly unpalatable at first, but with a fiery potential lurking just beneath the surface. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council was turned upside down and vigorously shaken. News of the humans' accomplishments and their surprising entourage of tamed groks spread like wildfire. Every established trade route, every diplomatic treaty, every scientific assumption was called into question. On Earth, the news was met with a mixture of amusement and fierce pride. Overnight, the world went from being the butt of galactic jokes to a source of both fear and fascination. Calls for technological demonstrations and trade offers flooded in, along with a whole host of curious scientists eager to study both the humans' rapid progress and the supposedly impossible feat of Grok's domestication. Ambassador Johnson became an overnight celebrity of sorts. His interviews were broadcast across 1,000 worlds, filled with folksy wisdom and disarming candor.
"Now, ain't nothing special about us," he'd say, scratching behind Moonshine's ear. "I just got tired of being underestimated, that's all."
The Galactic Council initially caught flat-footed, began to adapt. Bureaucratic hurdles were cleared with unprecedented speed. Trade negotiations, once stalled for decades, were finalized within weeks. Turned out that a little sense of urgency, injected with a healthy dose of fear, worked wonders for productivity. Joint research programs were initiated, human engineers shaking their heads and chuckling at the convoluted solutions the Council had devised for problems they had solved decades ago. In return, the humans received access to a vast library of scientific knowledge, absorbing and applying it at a terrifying rate. And the Groks? They became somewhat unwilling mascots. While still imposing, their reputation shifted from apex predators to oversized, slightly slobbery guard dogs. Sugarlump, in particular, became strangely fond of soft, algae-based treats developed specifically for her by a terrified yet dedicated team of bioengineers. As the galaxy adjusted to the human phenomenon as it became known, Zatrilli couldn't help but marvel. He'd initially pegged them as a blip, a momentary distraction. Now they were an unstoppable force, their influence growing with each passing day. The change wasn't just technological, it was cultural. Humans injected a sense of urgency, a willingness to experiment that had frankly become stagnant within the Council. Even their language became peppered with phrases like, "Get her done," or "think outside the box," and particularly puzzling, "Yeehaw!" Life on Earth became a source of endless fascination. Galactic broadcasts showcase everything from rodeos to reality shows about swamp alligator hunters. Fashion trends shifted with denim and 10-gallon hats suddenly appearing on some of the galaxy's most influential figures. Even cuisine wasn't untouched. A chain of restaurants specializing in this barbecue became alarmingly popular, despite the horrified chirps of disapproval from the plant-based species. Zatrilli himself had formed a cautious friendship with Ambassador Johnson. While still infuriatingly casual, the man possessed a sharp mind and a determination that commanded respect.
You know, folks back home used to say, "Never poke a sleeping bear." I reckon the galaxy had been snoozing for a long time till we showed up and gave it a good kick right in the tail feathers.
Zatrilli couldn't help but agree. The humans weren't just a disruptive force. They were the jolt the Council desperately needed. Whether they'd ultimately prove saviors or a hurricane remained to be seen. One thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same. The years whirled by, a whirlwind of change and adaptation rippling through the Galactic Council. Humans once dismissed as primitives were now sought-after advisors, their opinions given significant weight in interstellar affairs. Their uncanny ability to solve problems with a combination of grit, ingenuity, and duct tape, the uses of which baffled many sophisticated races, was legendary. Yet Earth itself remained an enigma. For all their advancements, humans clung stubbornly to their roots. Rodeos, barbecues, and country music still thrived. Ambassador Johnson, now sporting a few more silver streaks in his hair, was fond of saying, "Now, we may be reaching for the stars, but our feet are still firmly planted in good old-fashioned dirt." The Groks, too, integrated strangely into galactic society. While never truly domesticated, a begrudging, treat-driven truce formed. Sugarlump and her offspring became farmed as diplomatic aides, their mere presence often softening even the toughest negotiators, who could argue when faced with the mountain of slobbery affection demanding snacks. Zatrilli, elevated to Grand Monitor, reflected on the shift with a wry chuckle. Fear had given way to a cautious respect, then to true collaboration. He, along with many of the longer-serving council members, saw their influence waning, replaced by the dynamic energy they struggled to contain. One afternoon, finding Johnson gazing at a holographic image of his world, Zatrilli approached hesitantly. "You miss it, don't you?" Johnson sighed. "More than you think," he admitted. "The stars are mighty fine, but sometimes a man just wants to sit on his porch and watch the sun go down without having to think about stellar expansion and trade route tariffs." Zatrilli extended an antenna, his version of a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Perhaps, Ambassador, you've earned a long vacation." Johnson grinned. "Now, that's an idea I can get behind. Might even take Sugarlump fishing. Here, catfish and algae monsters are quite the combination." He winked.
You fellas just try not to burn down the place while I'm gone.
As Johnson strolled away whistling an old country tune, Zatrilli was struck with the realization it wasn't that the humans sought to dominate the galaxy, it was that they could no longer be contained. The humans had irrevocably changed the fabric of the Galactic Council, and the universe would continue to adapt or get left behind in a cloud of stardust and the faint smell of barbecue. The galaxy wasn't just getting used to humans, it was becoming more like them. Resourcefulness, once scoffed at as impatience, became a valued trait. Bureaucratic red tape was slashed and replaced with a begrudging acceptance of getting her done, although the accompanying twang still sent shivers down the spines of some of the stuffier delegates. Even conflict resolution began to adopt a human-flavored approach. In one particularly tense border dispute, a human negotiator brought representatives of the warring factions to a remote moon for what he called a campfire sit-down. For 3 grueling days and nights, fueled by terrible coffee and burnt sausages, they hashed out their problems, emerging red-eyed but with a signed peace accord. Both sides swore they'd never do it again, but grudgingly admitted it worked better than any sterile negotiation room ever had. The council, once a symbol of measured progress and predictable debates, was infused with a chaotic energy. Yet somehow it thrived. New treaties were formed, scientific breakthroughs occurred, and a sense of shared purpose began to solidify, born from the initial fear sparked by those bumbling, brilliant, barbecue-loving humans. And Ambassador Johnson? He became a legend, the hillbilly who shook the stars. His retirement on Earth was anything but quiet. He ran a ranch that was more a wildlife sanctuary for retired groks and conducted long, rambling lectures at the newly founded Intergalactic Relations Academy. His catchphrase? Common sense ain't so common after all, echoed on countless worlds. Zatrilli, in his final address as Grand Monitor, reflected on the human influence, a whirlwind of disruption and revitalization. We may have protocols, he stated, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. We must also remember the spirit of collaboration, of ingenuity, of the occasional well-timed yee-haw. The assembled council, a vibrant mix of species, scales, feathers, and antennae, erupted in a cacophony of cheers, whistles, and approving chirps. The humans, those rough-edged newcomers with their tenacity and twang, had changed everything. And the galaxy, once set in its ways, was ready to embrace what came next, fueled by optimism, a healthy dose of wary respect, and the lingering scent of barbecue drifting across the stars.